Thank you so much for joining us for today's Lunch and Learn, Offshore Wind in the Gulf of Maine. The development of offshore wind technology in Maine is a major opportunity to create jobs, grow clean energy to meet our ambitious climate targets, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And like any infrastructure project, it's important to do this right. Next slide. We are joined today by two of the people charged with making sure Maine does develop offshore wind responsibly in coordination with Maine's fishing community and environmental stakeholders. Dan Burgess is director of the Governor's Energy Office. Deputy Director Celina Cunningham is leading the office's offshore wind initiative. Dan and Celina, we're really looking forward to hearing what's going on with offshore wind in the Gulf of Maine. Thanks for being with us today. Next slide. My name is Kathleen Neal. I'm the Director of Policy and Partnerships at Maine Conservation Voters and Maine Conservation Alliance. Our organizations work to protect Maine's environment and our democracy by building diverse coalitions, influencing public policy, holding politicians accountable, and winning elections. Next slide. A few technical notes for today's event. You are all muted, but we do want to hear from you. Please send questions to me, Kathleen, through the chat as they occur to you. You can find the chat by hovering your mouse over the bottom of your screen, and I'll keep track of questions to ask during the Q&A at the end. If you have any technical difficulties, please message Will Sedlak through the chat for help. This event is being recorded and the video will be posted on our website later this afternoon, where you can also find recordings of all of our previous Lunch and Learns. Thank you all again for joining us. Dan and Celina, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kathleen, for having us and for everyone that's joining on this lovely snowy Friday or cold Friday, at least here where I am. So I'm the director of the Governor's Energy Office. The Energy Office serves as the primary advisor to the governor on all things related to energy. We work closely with state agencies and the legislature to advance policies, and just really thrilled to be here with you all. I've been in this role for 2 years. And Celina, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Celina Cunningham, Deputy Director and in the Governor's Energy Office, and work primarily on renewable energy and have been in the office for a year. And it's really great to see everyone here today.
So I'm going to attempt to share my screen, which I'm getting better and better at in the Zoom world that we're in. Can everyone see that okay?
Looks great, Dan.
You can see that? Okay, great. Thank you. So what we're going to do is just try to give a little bit of an offshore wind 101, and then talk specifically about some of the state programs and policies that we have in place. So first and foremost, when you think about Maine's clean energy mix or energy mix and kind of where the state is headed from a clean energy and climate change perspective, I'm sure if you're on this call, you know that Maine has passed some really ambitious targets related to those areas. And so first and foremost, we have emission reduction requirements of 45% from 1990 levels by 2030 and 80% by 2050. And the governor signed an executive order for the state to be carbon neutral. The governor accepted and received a climate action plan, which many on this call were involved with completing on December 1st. There are a number of different strategies within that. I won't spend much time going through that, but contextually, I think it's important to note that these efforts that we're working on, from clean energy to climate change, are set in statute, and we're beginning to work on policies and programs to achieve them. I also think it's important to note and be aware of where our energy is coming from. So Maine shares an electric grid with the other New England states, and it's managed by an entity known as ISO New England. The top chart on the left shows the percentage of electricity by resource type that the region has used. Up here, all the way in the top left, you can see year 2000, all the way to 2019, 2020. And what you can see is 20 years ago, we were using 35% coal and oil for electricity. That has dramatically shifted and gone down. to where we are using less than 1%, and oftentimes even less than that, depending on the weather. We've seen a shift in this blue. We're using more natural gas than 20 years ago, and then we're beginning to make progress in growing the renewable space. And states are doing that through the passage of in one way, through something called the Renewable Portfolio Standard, which is the requirement that states set for a certain percentage of electricity to come from renewable energy resources. This chart here shows that when it comes to new resources, Maine was in the middle of the pack, and because of legislation passed and signed by the governor in 2019, Maine now has a target of 80% renewable energy coming. And this chart shows coming from new growth, which puts Maine at the top of the New England states. So, as we think about our energy future, the opportunity for offshore wind has been discussed in the state for 10 to 15 years. There have been prior task forces and work happening at the university, which we'll get into a little bit. But just from a basic perspective, the idea of offshore wind is putting a turbine out into the ocean, though some lake projects have been proposed in some other areas, but generally in the ocean. Primarily, until recent years, those have been fixed bottom platforms. Lately, and for the Gulf of Maine, which we're going to talk about, is so deep, is almost certainly going to require floating platforms. Offshore wind has really grown in a number of different ways. One is, in advancing some of these platforms. The other is in how big the turbines are and how efficient they're becoming. You look at, actually, this is an older chart where this shows an 8-megawatt turbine as big as the Washington Monument. Turbines have since grown even larger than that. The electricity is generated. An undersea cable is run from the location to the electric grid onshore. I think some of the exciting things about offshore wind is that offshore winds are typically stronger during the day, which is good for when we're using our energy. They are typically higher in the winter, which is helpful from an electric grid perspective, as we have a winter peaking system or peaks in the winter. Offshore wind resources generally, at least in the United States, are near most Americans. So 80% of the electric demand occurs in coastal states and along the Great Lakes, and that's where the offshore wind is. So it is a good resource from that perspective. The other good news is that offshore wind costs are going down. This has been predominantly driven by work development in Europe and Asia and other areas where you're seeing dozens to hundreds of projects move forward. The United Kingdom has a target for all of their electricity to come from offshore wind by 2030. So from Europe to Asia, we're seeing rapid development. Much of that has been in the fixed bottom, and you can see even over the last 5 to 10 years, we're seeing prices come down as technologies advance, as supply chains get up and running, and it's expected, according to NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, that those prices will continue to come down for floating wind as well. Most of the resources are in deeper waters. And so folks that are tracking and thinking about the long-term opportunity for offshore wind really see floating as a significant opportunity. So what's happening in the United States? So offshore wind is really seen rapid growth and momentum even over the last 5 years. There are 7 turbines in the water right now, 5 off the coast of Rhode Island and 2 in Virginia. However, there are close to 30,000 megawatts of projects in the pipeline. So that's states that have set targets or goals for offshore wind. So there are under 100 megawatts now with those 7 turbines, 30,000 in the potential in the pipeline up and down the East Coast. And 10,000 of those megawatts have contracts. So they are slated to move forward with contracts. This map here shows all of the lease areas. We'll get into a little bit more, but the federal government controls or is responsible for areas that are 3 miles out from the coast. So the state waters are within 3 miles. After 3 miles, the federal government has the responsibility for, and they go through a process which we'll get into to identify those sites. This map is where all of the are the sites where lease areas have been identified for offshore wind. So you can see from North Carolina all the way up to Rhode Island, there's significant locations and lease areas identified. So some of the other, I think, things to be aware of is that if you look at the wind speeds, Maine is actually in a very good place. The speeds in the Gulf of Maine, and you can see down the East Coast, particularly in these areas, are very strong. Some of the best in the country, and very high quality wind speeds. So it is a good opportunity to consider development. I think we're considering offshore wind in a number of different venues, or it comes up in a number of different, state activities, from economic development and the 10-year economic plan that was put together to the climate action plan, which we talked about a little bit, to the state's clean energy economy plan. How do we look at advancing more clean energy jobs? And then again, we'll get into some of the other opportunities. So I'll just a couple more slides before I turn it over to Celina. So our intent here is to take a measured, deliberative approach. We want to explore opportunities, answer questions, especially with a relatively newer technology like floating wind, as that becomes more moves to the commercial space. We want to coordinate along the region and advance partnerships and engage with those stakeholders that have interest in the Gulf of Maine. So how are we doing that? In a number of different ways. The governor released announced the intent to form an offshore wind initiative, which is our office is tasked with running, and so we are tasked with seeking strategic opportunities to maximize compatibility, to engage in the federal government process known as the BOEM Task Force, or the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management Task Force. And fortunately, late last year, we were awarded a more than $2 million grant to support that work through a roadmap process. So Celina and her team are busy putting that together. That will help kind of support this long-term strategic opportunity to look at ports and infrastructure, manufacturing, innovation, have some ocean environmental data and stakeholder engagement as we looked at to the longer term about what Maine's opportunities and challenges might be. So as mentioned, typically, in the federal waters, so that's greater than 3 miles out, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management runs a task force type strategy for engaging stakeholders as they seek to identify where lease areas could be set. They typically will go through these task force processes, identify a large location, and then auction off that site to private developers. That's typically, there's a chart here, anywhere from a 5 to 7 year process or longer, depending on the process, to go from beginning of task force to actual construction. Maine is participating in a task force called by BOEM with New Hampshire and Massachusetts. The task force has met once. There are not plans currently to meet again, and Maine is, as you're going to hear from Celina, focused on will participate in this, but is also focused on a nearer term opportunity for a research array, not necessarily focused on commercial. Along with this, as mentioned, with offshore wind development comes an opportunity for port and infrastructure development. The governor in March asked or directed DOT in coordination with our office to conduct a study to look at opportunities for the Port of Searsport as a place that could be a hub for transportation, assembly, fabrication of offshore wind turbines, and to look at what investments or modifications would need to be made there. That right there is a picture of Mac Point Terminal, which is an active terminal which is host to a number of different sites and facilities. You can actually see up here, Mac Point in Searsport does, these are wind turbines or wind turbine blades or components. They might actually be the components of what the turbine sits on. but is already taking delivery of wind turbine products and has for a while. Most of the onshore wind products have come through Mac Point terminals, so it's already used to handling those. So the study will look at opportunities for that. And importantly, a recent study showed that offshore wind is a $70 billion supply chain opportunity for the United States, with a particular focus on the East Coast. So I think with that, I might, Celina, if it's all right with you, turn the remainder of this over to you to talk through kind of where we've been, where we're going, and talk specifically about the research array.
Sure. So as Dan went through, we have these processes in place to take a look at the long-term strategic opportunities to grow offshore wind industry and advance offshore wind over the long term in Maine and through the federal process for leasing of commercial projects. At the same time, we are pursuing some individual projects that are in place, and so we'll walk through kind of the history of that, and one in particular, the research array that the state has is beginning to pursue, and I'll spend some time talking through what that is and what it means. So, as some of you may know, in 2013, with the University of Maine launched a successful 1/8 scale pilot project of its technology and off of Castine. And then there have a full scale version of that targeted for 2023. And they are working with two developers who have formed New England Aquaventus to partner with the University of Maine on launching a full scale turbine in state waters off of Monhegan Island. So that is on track there. And then the research array is the next step that I'll spend some time talking about. And then future is the commercial larger scale projects that the state is involved in those conversations with the federal government, will be part of those processes. We don't know exactly when those projects will be in the water, but something that we continue to engage in and monitor, and want to make sure that those projects are built in a way that protects Maine's values Maine's ecosystem and our resources and our communities, as well as taking advantage of the economic opportunities from any projects that may be built in the Gulf of Maine. So this is just a picture of the University of Maine technology that they've designed. It is concrete hulls, a concrete hull as opposed to steel, which is a unique design that makes it we can create jobs here in Maine, and it's suitable for the water depths that we have here. So that wanted to show you a picture of what it looks like in the water, and share a little bit more about the shape of it. And it's a great opportunity from a job standpoint to be able to fabricate that here locally, as opposed to elsewhere, where since we don't have the type of steel that the type of technology and experience that we might need for other floating technology. Next slide. So the research array. So the state saw an opportunity in trying to see how we can learn about bringing offshore wind into our marine environment in a multi-turbine pilot project. And so we have this, we'll use the University of Maine technology. We're planning for the project to be well offshore, with the intent of advancing our understanding of how this floating technology will interact with the marine environment, how it will affect our ecosystem, how it will affect and impact our fishing economy and industry, and how we can minimize those impacts, and take these lessons that we learned from this project into and help to shape the future projects. We also look forward to the opportunity of bringing clean, renewable energy to Maine's grid from this project. So next slide. So we're planning to have 12 or fewer turbines. The area that we're going to be using offshore is 16 square miles or smaller. The state is in the very early process of this project. We have announced our intent to do this in November. We held a series of webinars in December, and had a number of meetings since then to talk to stakeholders about this approach. Next slide. Who is involved in the project? The state of Maine, the governor's energy office is leading this initiative. We will apply for this lease of federal waters from the federal government. We are partnering with New England Aquaventus, which is 2 offshore wind companies that have formed New England Aquaventus, and they're also working on the one turbine project off of Monhegan. The University of Maine, we intend to use their technology, and then we're of course working with a wide variety of stakeholders, utilizing the expertise of NGOs, federal partners, other states to maximize our understanding of the area offshore and continue to try to collaborate to the best of our ability to make sure that we can all learn from this project. Next slide. So a little bit about the timeline for what we're doing here. We are again in the early phases now of engaging. We will submit an application to the federal government in sometime in 2021, where we'll identify a specific site for this lease. The federal government will then review it. At that point, we will do a number of years of work to do site assessments to figure out what is happening out there, what is the baseline understanding of the ocean environment, and then work on a design of the project with stakeholder engagement. And the developers will construct and operate the project that will we hope to have built in the next 5 years or so. It would then be operating for 20 years or longer and supplying power into the main grid. Next slide. So we see a lot of opportunity here in terms of how we can learn and collaborate on this work. We understand that while there are some who see a lot of opportunity from offshore wind, others are concerned, knowing that there are a lot of activity that is happening off our shores, and our fishing industry is obviously an incredibly important cultural and economic contributor to our communities and our state. And so in these conversations that we've had since we launched this proposal, we've heard concerns about offshore wind projects in the state waters. So that is just 3 miles from the Maine coast. Given the prevalence of our fishing activity there, our ecosystem, as well as viewsheds concerns as well. And then we also heard, and so what the governor has done in response to some of the current concerns she's heard is she's announced that she is supportive of a 10-year moratorium on new offshore wind projects. So it wouldn't impact the existing project that's planned in terms of the Monhegan project, but it would really focus our efforts on the federal waters, where we think this just makes the most sense from a larger project, offshore wind project standpoint. The other thing we did is we added several months into the planning and this process for this lease application to allow for more time for dialogue with interested stakeholders. And lastly, we'll take a look at our applicable state laws to ensure that we are protecting Maine's valuable assets as we pursue offshore wind. So we have taken some initial steps to try to figure out where we're going to locate this proposed project. I won't read through all of these, but these are the initial steps that the state has taken to identify where to put this. And the one I'll emphasize is we did identify the southern half of Maine for a couple of reasons. One is that there are a limited number of high voltage interconnection points that there are available for connecting offshore wind. And so we are focusing on the project in locations that we can interconnect it and connect into the main grid there. Next slide. So this is a map of the area in the blue. The red is a DOD exclusion area where the project won't be built. And then you can see Wyman Station and Maine Yankee, those small points are the 2 potential interconnection points. That decision in terms of where we interconnect will not be made at this stage of the process, it will be made later on. And I'll just note that this area, while it's it's fairly sizable, we know that there are important areas for fishing. There's some shipping lanes in this area, so this is a kind of a starting point, and we will have dialogue and conversations with people to narrow down where is the best place to put. And this project. And if you see the blue dot on the right-hand side, that's the scale of the 16 square mile site that we're working on siting. Next slide. So how we're going to do this, we've at the start, we're in the very bottom phase in terms of just taking a look at the baseline data that's available, working with our federal and NGO partners and stakeholders. We'll work up the chain to make a final siting decision that the state will then put forward to the federal government for approval of. Next slide. So a key component of this project is research. As Dan mentioned, there is quite a long history in the world in terms of fixed bottom, less in terms of floating technology. So we want to really understand not only floating technology, but given that there haven't been projects in the Gulf of Maine, how they will interact with our ecosystem. So from the very beginning of this project, we are siting it, designing it, and organizing it in a way that will really maximize the research potential from this project. And that's the key driver for this array. We've identified, we'll take some steps to identify some key themes and had some good conversations with people about what are the questions that are out there that we really need to answer and have more information on to help mitigate any potential impacts as we advance offshore wind in the region. We recognize that this is we are in the early phase of this plan, and over the coming years, we'll set up a more formal structure to work on having an inclusive approach to research and a strategic approach to it, so that we are maximizing the types of project or research that we're doing at the site, and that it's going to be applicable for future most applicable. We'll also work on pursuing federal and other funding sources to do this, and we intend to have the data to be available to others so that we can all learn from it. Next slide. And this is just a few of the research categories that we've been thinking of. We have a number of, more details on all of these, but when you look at a multi-turbine array, you really learn about what's happening between the turbines of it in terms of what's possible, whether fishing activity is possible, and that fishermen feel comfortable fishing between the turbines is a question that we really want to investigate more, and learning more about different, from a technology standpoint, for instance, what types of mooring lines and how to design them to be most efficient from an energy standpoint, but also from an impact standpoint. And then on the workforce side, what does it take to set forward a serial manufacturing of the University of Maine technology? How can we get the workforce trained and create a Maine-based workforce to support offshore wind? And what kind of training do we need in order to do that? And how can we utilize our supply chain to help not only on this project, but to put people in a good position to be able to work on any future projects in the Gulf of Maine and potentially serve other parts of the region in terms of the technology they have. The next slide. So I briefly touched on this, but we held a state of knowledge workshop last Friday. I'd encourage everyone to go to our website, maine.gov. I don't know what the rest of it is, Dan. Well, I think it's on the last slide. You'll see it. And we have a number of recorded webinars, and the workshop is recorded as well. There are a number of FAQs. We'll plan on holding work sessions over the next couple of months to dive into some of the data from experts. And then if as time allows, and if COVID allows us, we'll get out to the docks to hopefully talk to some fishermen too, to get an idea of what activities they are, what fishing activity is happening in the region. And then we'll make sure that we're coordinating across all the different groups of interest to help inform the state on the siting process. Next slide. And then that was a lot of information, but I just thought by saying that, so we have this short period of time where we're working on pursuing this application for a specific area to put this project to the federal government. The conversation is not going to stop there. We're going to bring these ideas and research questions and engage people into this broader roadmap plan that we are pursuing that will outline for we'll work over the next 2 years to outline what are strategic opportunities for the state to pursue offshore wind and what questions do we need to work together to answer. So that we're planning on launching this spring. It will be a stakeholder process. Those meetings will be open to the public. I encourage you to engage at any level if you want to. I include our contact information as well as thank you. There's our website where you can learn more about offshore wind generally, the research array, the initiative, as well as the process that we're going through. And I'm happy we're both happy to take any questions, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you
Thanks,
so
Celina. Kathleen,
much.
We went through a lot pretty quickly, and so we've left plenty of time for questions, and happy to recover things that we went through too fast, or just have questions. So thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Dan. Thank you, Celina. We already have a ton of questions, and folks can keep sending them to me through the chat. But before we do, I want to say a quick note of apology to our participants. Zoom gave some of us a little trouble with the passcode today. I was in that group, so I feel you. And just a reminder that the whole program has been recorded, and we'll send out a link with that recording later this afternoon. So if you missed the beginning, you'll get another shot to take a look, and we will definitely get to those questions in just a moment. Thanks again for sharing the information about how to stay informed. It sounds like things are going to be changing and evolving, and it's great that there's an opportunity to be connected. So we will send out a link in the follow-up email this afternoon that you can sign up to get those email announcements and updates and stay tuned in. All right. We're going to kick off the Q&A with a question from 5-year-old Eamon Brown. I think that, Eamon, you probably get the gold star for our youngest Lunch and Learn participant today. So we're gonna find out the answer to your question first of all. How does electricity get made from wind?
It's a great question, Eamon, and thank you so much for asking it and for being engaged in these conversations. So at a high level, and I'm not an engineer, so the turbine has 3 different blades. The wind blows and turns those blades, and then on the inside there is a machine which then takes that energy and turns that into electricity. So there's a turbine that turns within that and creates electricity. That electricity then will flow through wires or cables and be delivered to each of us, so that when we turn on the computer or we watch our Friday night movie night TV, that there is electricity there to power. That's a great question, Eamon.
Thanks, Dan. And I can tell from your answer that you're not only the director of the Governor's Energy Office, but the dad to some young kids. So thank you for right-sizing that response. I appreciate it, and I'm sure Eamon does too. Let's dig into some of the pieces of that. The cables that come across with that electricity. Does the state moratorium block cables that are going to be routed through state waters, even if they started in federal waters on offshore projects, or what's the status on that?
Celina, you want to take that?
Sure. So the intent of the moratorium is on offshore wind projects themselves, not the cable or any sort of associated components of the project project. So a cable it would not impact the cable from a federal project or anything associated with it. Just new offshore wind projects in state waters.
That makes sense.
With again 3 miles.
And where that cable comes on shore, is there any development required there, or is it just a big plug? What does that look like?
That is a great question. So there are a number of existing cables in our islands across the state that come onshore already. So there is experience here in Maine with these types of cables. So they will interconnect into they'll have to connect into the grid, and there'll be an onshore substation. And so you just have to get that cable onshore in order to connect. We're looking at areas where we won't have to have a lot of new build for transmission in order to make this project. If we put it into some random spot on the coast, you might have to build out more transmission in order to bring the power to where we use it. I'll also say that the intent is to bury the cables under the ocean, and bury the cables in the ocean to the extent that it's at all possible. And if we can't bury it, then we cover it.
Gotcha. That's really helpful. Once we connect into that substation, there's been a lot of news lately about some of the challenges that we face getting solar energy integrated into our grid. Is Maine's electric grid ready to integrate wind power, or what do we need to think about on that side?
That's a really, really good question. I think as we seek to add more clean energy resources, many of them distributed, right? So some of these smaller projects that you're reading about, we need to make sure that we've got the electric grid infrastructure in place in order to be able to handle that. And I think this is a challenge that you're seeing take place across the country in many ways. And you can think about, as we all start driving more electric cars or adding more electric heat pumps, those challenges will continue to exacerbate. Well, not exacerbate, but we need to make sure that we've got the grid in place that can handle both the new demand and the new resources that are coming with it. I think we need to do some more detailed analysis on exactly where this will eventually interconnect to understand the impacts. But thinking about where our greatest areas of demand are, again, offshore wind kind of goes well with that. So I think, we have not done the, Celina can correct me if I'm wrong, the full exactly this is what it'll be, but there are kind of existing areas that we think those two areas can be interconnection points to be able to, where there could be some existing capacity to come on shore.
Great. Do we need to worry about transmission losses from the point of generation on that offshore turbine to the grid, or is that energy pretty well maintained?
So one of the reasons, there is the further offshore that it is, you do run into some losses. So that is something that the engineers will take a look at, and how to make sure that we, I think that the technology is pretty far along, but when it's a pretty long cable, 40-mile cable, you do have some lack of efficiency. So that's something we'll monitor and keep an eye on.
Lots of engineering going into all of these decisions. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about the turbines themselves and where they're sited. First of all, wind is good, but a lot of wind. Do we need to worry about hurricanes and how these turbines are going to hold up to extreme weather?
I think it's something we should absolutely be focused on. I think the 1/8 scale project that Celina mentioned that was off the coast of Castine did receive a very substantial, or did have a couple of large weather events or large storms that it was, and the results were good. It managed well during that. Celina, I think that what our indication and plan would be that these would be able to withstand a 500-year storm. And I think that as we see more extreme weather, and those are certainly things we'll need to consider, but that the plan, or it would be constructed in a way to be able to handle that.
You guys think of everything. Thank you. What about the impact in the immediate area of those turbines? Lots of folks with questions today about the impact on wildlife. So both birds, right whales, fish, what do we need to think about?
Yeah, so we have some understanding of what the ecosystem looks like out there, but not a lot. And so what we want to try to do is use the existing information that we have from either experience with projects that are south of here, so from Block Island, there's projects that are fixed bottom, so concrete as opposed to the concrete floating hull that we're talking about here. And we want to that's part of the reason why we want the research array, to learn to get these questions answered. And the thing is that we believe that some of these concerns can be mitigated. For instance, if the radar, we can use different approaches from a radar perspective if the lighting on the array is problematic. And there are so we have some understanding of impacts, but not enough. And we believe that we will both through baseline studies in advance of any construction, but then during the construction operations itself, learn how to both minimize the impacts during the operations of this project, but then also bring future learnings to future commercial projects that are much larger than this.
I guess some of these questions we really can't answer until we see them in action, right? So that's the value of that research array.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's exciting to think about having a research array be the next step here, because we can take that research focused approach going into it and have that inform this project, but also potential future projects. And I think this is going to be a really valuable step to take so that we're in the driver's seat when it comes to offshore wind development in the Gulf of Maine.
I'd also add that we'd go through a full kind of environmental analysis that the federal government would go through to make sure that whether it be birds or whales, that we are meeting any sort of requirements that are in order to protect those species as well.
I'd imagine that there are folks who have a front row seat to some of those impacts. The Maine's fishing community, lobstermen. Are you getting good responses from fishing groups and filling out some of those surveys from DMR and participating in the stakeholder group? And how can we help make sure that we've got good participation in all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to speak for the entire industry. I think that there are a lot of individuals. I think that we've heard strong concerns from some about what it means in terms of impacts to specific activities. People are providing constructive feedback about what they're doing in this area and what specific activity is happening and how we might work around that. And so I think that there. Obviously, the industry is facing the lobster industry and other aspects of the fishing industry are facing a number of issues at this time. There's a right whale rule and action that's happening now that is taking a lot of people's attention. So I think that what we want to do is have a dialogue with the fishing folks in the fishing industry to understand what we're doing. We hope that we can find a way to learn together about how to minimize impacts, but and find people who are interested in having those conversations, engaging with us. But we also understand that it's tough when we're talking about changing the way that we've been using the ocean for many years.
It does seem that offshore wind is a really important part of meeting Maine's climate goals right now. I wonder if you guys could say a little bit more about the importance of that, and is it possible to meet our climate goals without offshore wind, or is this really a key part of the process or the plan?
So I think what you're seeing up and down the East Coast, and particularly just to the south of us, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, they're all making really major investments in offshore wind development to meet their clean energy and climate objectives. I think we're, as the system moves from, again, coal and oil 20 years ago to, a reliance on natural gas, a reliance on nuclear, as a region, we having these kind of larger resources with really high capacity factors, meaning that they are, generating electricity at kind of a greater capacity when they're being used, is really important, especially as we, again, look to add more demand on the system through electric vehicles, through heat pumps, through other means to meet our emission reduction goals and frankly cost reduction targets. And so, as up and down the Atlantic coast, you're seeing these investments to meet those targets. I think the same can be true we're actually getting ready to release a renewables kind of a plan on how a report on how we meet our 2030 targets. And there are several scenarios within that where you can see offshore wind playing a role. I think as costs come down in outer years, you can see it playing a greater role. But making those investments now allow us to advance technology that can reduce costs. Again, show us that research perspective of how it can be done. The United Kingdom just announced that they wanted every home in the UK powered by offshore wind by 2030. You're seeing just really a ton of growth in Europe and frankly in Asia too. And you really see the potential from the U.S. to go from, again, 7 turbines in the water right now to much more than that. And so we see the energy opportunity and the economic opportunity with it as well.
Yeah, really, that economic opportunity feels equally important and exciting to the energy one right now. You mentioned something about the $70 billion supply chain opportunity. What does that mean, and what are the parts of the supply chain that Maine may be able to tap into?
So I'll start. Celina, feel free to jump in on what I missed. But the University of Delaware has a special initiative for offshore wind, and they conducted a study looking at supply chain opportunities. And so that's everything, from my understanding, from fabrication to installation to operations and maintenance of these facilities. So it's not just building them; it's operating and maintaining them. Main strategic, I think, opportunity here is in the floating space. The Gulf of Wind is almost certainly too deep for fixed bottom wind, and so floating offshore wind is what makes sense for the Gulf of Maine for offshore wind. But as those to the south of us develop the areas that are available for fixed bottom, they too will need to move to floating. And so as Maine can make investments now, whether it's port infrastructure or fabrication or just advancements that we can make, it's also an opportunity for us to serve and to kind of serve some of those other markets that will surely be growing. And longer term, I think folks see floating offshore wind is the most cost effective because you can build it next to land and then tow it out and put it in place, as opposed to having to do all the construction and installation right out there in the water. So it requires less specialized boats and can be done kind of in a not in a serial construction way close to shore and then be towed out. So there's a lot of exciting opportunities, and that's why we've got are excited about this roadmap to look at the supply chain opportunities for Maine, but also within the greater market, and that'll kind of take that 10-year look out at it. But so I don't know what you'd add there.
Yeah, I'd say we've been, a number of companies and organizations have been looking over the last decade in terms of how Maine can serve the industry, and we're picking up and building on those pieces. And through this roadmap exercise, will really, I think, carve out where are the strategic opportunities, what are the new markets, and how can we help smaller Maine companies who may have never thought about offshore wind. How can we tell them that whatever your piece of composite or other buoy or rope that you may be working on, how can that either help in the Gulf of Maine or the global industry? And so that's one of the goals and that we're trying to get out of this longer strategic plan effort.
It's really exciting. And going back for a minute to the 2013 prototype, where was that fabricated and how is it going? Where does the energy come to shore? Give us a little bit more insight into that.
So that was a short-term pilot project that University of Maine developed. It did produce electricity for the grid, but I think it was 6 months. I know there are UMaine folks on the call that will correct me. but it was a shorter term initiative, really to show that that this technology and how it would work in the water. If you haven't had a chance to look at the University of Maine Advanced Composite Center, they are doing just world leading research there, and particularly with regards to floating offshore wind. They have a wind wave pool where they can put smaller demonstration scale to size, where they can see how it operates within certain conditions. It's really the work that Dr. Dogger and the team are doing there is really pretty amazing. They have a wind blade test operation where they can put a blade up and test it in certain conditions, and it's really exciting, the work that they're doing there. And this kind of foundation design and mooring work that they're doing is a key part of this type of work too.
Gotcha. Thanks for clarifying that. A question about the power that these turbines will generate. I know we talked a little bit about some of the challenges for the grid and just those questions and engineering challenges that we need to figure out, but do we expect that will have an impact on electricity prices? Will that impact look different, in the early stages versus over time? And will that power go, recognizing that we have a regional grid, will that power be directed to Maine, or is it going to go somewhere else? So that's a lot.
Yeah. No, the plan is for the power to be interconnected and to serve Maine load. And so that is the plan. The ultimate cost depends on where the project is located, how far out, how it is structured, what components, what turbines are used. But what you can see from market trends and what we've seen in real life experience is that prices are declining, both for fixed bottom and for floating. The fixed bottom price declines have been really significant over the last few years. And so it's becoming even more cost competitive, to where these states to the south of us are contracting for a lot because the prices are so good. And so the market shows that the same is an analysis from nonpartisan National Renewable Energy Lab is that is going to continue on the floating side as well. So I think it's an opportunity for investment now, but also longer term opportunity when it comes to cost. But we're something that we're very focused on.
Thanks. That makes a lot of sense. There is a long time frame here, right? The development of these projects sounds like takes time. The technology evolves over time. We've seen some political changes over the years, and with them a different kind of appetite for offshore wind. What are we doing to make sure that we don't sort of lose ground, or that we keep this momentum moving, no matter who's in the Blaine house?
Yeah, it's a good question. I might ask you, Kathleen, what no. I think that what's happening is the market is developing. Doesn't matter what political stripe your state might be, and kind of so that in some ways this kind of growth in the market is really, and the cost competitiveness of it is really moving a lot of states in that direction. But it clearly matters kind of who's in the leadership position, whether it's state or federal, and kind of what the perspective looks like. I mean, I think much of what we're talking about, this 10-year moratorium being on state waters, again, really important, just state water, new state water projects, putting that into legislation, so that there is that that kind of 10-year pause in statute, not just kind of by executive order or something like that. And so I think as we look to move this forward, it'll be really important for, we'll be wanting to work with the legislature really closely to, kind of help set the policy direction for years to come.
And I'd just add that when you look at the that kind of support that we've seen down the East Coast, given the onshore kind of economic opportunities, that there is a bipartisan support for the type of investment that we're seeing in communities. And so I think that there's a right way to do it that will be, as Dan said, market driven and create opportunity for new additive main jobs and business growth. And so from that, hopefully it'll be a no-brainer.
Absolutely.
Kathleen, I knew the UMaine team was listening, so they've told me that the 1/8 scale was in the water for 18 months from 2013 to 2014. So I was wrong on the 6 months. It was a little bit longer. And so it really did get to study and test the performance of that. And that has helped inform what we're doing going forward. So thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. That's fabulous. I'm going to try to squeeze in one more big question, which is, we've been talking a lot about the electricity making its way from the turbine onto the grid, but it sounds like there's some other really interesting possibilities, using excess energy to make green hydrogen, or solving some of those cable issues via offshore electrolyzers. Sounds like exciting opportunities.
Yeah, so what you're seeing, especially over in Europe, is some of these oil and gas companies that are used to doing offshore wind work. In fact, one project is doing some offshore wind around some of their oil and gas operations, and they're using just all the electricity out in the water on site. And so you're seeing some innovation there. And so the opportunity to turn electricity, especially if it's potentially curtailed or constrained or not able to be used into another fuel like hydrogen, is something that we're interested in reviewing. It doesn't necessarily make sense for this project, but it could be a really exciting opportunity in the future. But you're seeing folks kind of use electrolyzers offsite near the turbines. You're also seeing folks, this particularly in Europe, use them at the port or where the interconnection site is, to then be able to turn that into, a usable fuel, hydrogen, which is, if used through a fuel cell, doesn't have emissions, and so it's one way to kind of solve that storage problem. I should note there was a bill this week for Maine to do a green hydrogen pilot project, which I think seems pretty interesting, given how much renewable energy that we have that could lead to that.
Yeah, it is just so exciting to see Maine leading the way on some of this, and being informed by experiences, up and down the coast and around the world, but also carving out our piece of what offshore wind looks like in the Gulf of Maine. So thank you, Dan. Thank you, Celina, for giving us that window into what's going on. Thanks to everybody for joining us today and being interested in this. It's clearly one of the really big opportunities that our state has right now, both energy-wise and economically. So we'll send out that follow-up email this afternoon with the link, so you can sign up to make sure you stay up to date on all of these exciting developments. And we're going to do something really different next week, and I think I'm excited. I think it's going to be really adorable. Alicio Mortolini, who's an associate professor of the wildlife habitat conservation at the University of Maine in Orono, is going to join us to talk about bold mice and shy squirrels, how the personality of a mouse can shape a whole ecosystem and why it matters for conservation. I can't wait. Thank you for joining us in this Lunch and Learn series that lets us go from offshore wind to tiny little mice and squirrels. It is so much fun to have you with us every week, and I hope you have a beautiful weekend. Thanks, Dan and Celina.
Thank you.
Bye.